Chapter 1. Bly.
We were sitting by the fire, telling ghost stories.
Would you like to hear a ghost story about two children?
Douglas asked.
I've never told it to anyone. It's too horrible. It happened to my sister's governess a long time ago.
The woman, Douglas explained, was 20 when she left home to look for work. She went to see a man who needed a governess for his brother's 2 children. He was a gentleman, rich, good-looking and kind, with an expensive house in London. The children, a boy and a girl, came to live with him after their father died. But he had no wife or children himself, so he sent them to live at Bly, his house in the country, with his housekeeper, Mrs. Gross. They also had a governess there at first, but then she died, so the boy went away to school while the little girl stayed at Bly. The rich man now needed a new governess for the girl, and for the boy too, during the school holidays. He asked my friend not to worry him by sending him any news, letters or questions about the children. She had to decide everything for herself. The young woman thought that this was strange, but she needed the money, and she wanted to please the gentleman. So she agreed and went to Bly. This is her story. She wrote it down years later and sent it to Douglas before she died.
I came to Bly one fine afternoon in June. It was a large, old, happy house with bright flowers outside. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gross, opened the door to me, and I met the little girl, Flora, soon after. She was like a beautiful angel, with gold hair and a sweet face. I liked her at once. I was sure, too, that Mrs. Gross, a nice, strong countrywoman, would be my friend. She was happy to see me, perhaps too happy, but I didn't stop there and then to ask myself why. At dinner, I asked about Flora's brother, Miles.
"He will be here on Friday,"
said Mrs. Gross. That night, they moved Flora's bed into my room, and I spent the next day with her. She was happy to show me the gardens and the house, dancing in her blue dress from one room to another, running up and down the stairs, and taking me to the top of a big tower. And all the time, she told me little secrets about each place that we visited. On Wednesday evening, a letter came for me from the children's uncle. There was another letter, still in its envelope, inside it. The children's uncle wrote to ask me to read this letter, which came from Miles's school, and to decide myself what to do about it, without worrying him. I read it that evening, and got very little sleep that night. "They have expelled Miles from his school," I told Mrs. Gross next morning. She looked at me strangely, worried by the news.
"But what has he done, miss?"
"They don't say. They only say he cannot go back there. Is he bad for the other boys, do you think?"
"Master Miles? But he's just 10 years old.
She was right. It was hard to believe. So, is Miles never bad? I asked her some time later.
No, I can't say that. But a boy who is never bad is not a real boy for me.
I agree. Boys must be bad sometimes. But they must not corrupt others, I said. Mrs. Gross gave a strange laugh.
Are you afraid, miss? Could the young master corrupt you?
She asked. The next day, I spoke to Mrs. Gross again. What was she like, the last governess?
Young and beautiful, miss. Like you.
He likes us young and beautiful then, I said, thinking of the rich gentleman in London.
Oh, he did,
replied Mrs. Gross.
He liked everyone that way. I mean, he does,
she finished. Who were you speaking of just then? I asked her.
Oh, the master, of course.
I went on thinking about the last governess. Did she die here?
No, miss. She went home for a holiday, but she never came back. And then the master told us that she was dead. And now,
said Mrs. Gross,
I must get back to work.
When Miles arrived, I knew at once that the letter was a terrible mistake. He was a good, sweet child, just like his sister. I spoke to Mrs. Gross immediately. Anyone can see he is not bad. Look at him. She smiled.
Yes, miss. So, what will you do about the letter now?
Nothing, I said.
And what will you tell the master?
Nothing.
And what will you say to the boy?
Nothing.
Then I'll help you, miss,
she said, kissing me happily. I knew then that she was my friend. And so I began lessons with Miles and Flora. The children were young, strong, and happy, and were always nice to me. But soon, something happened at Bly that changed everything. In those long summer days, I often went outside for a walk when the children were in bed. On these evening walks, I often thought about how well I was doing my job, and about the children's uncle in London. Did he ever think of me? One evening, I was walking in the garden and thinking of him when I looked up. Suddenly, I got a great shock. I saw him there, on top of the tower. Then I got a second shock. The man on the tower was not the master. I felt cold and afraid. Everything was quiet. Nothing moved. Who was this man? Why did I know nothing about him? I could think of no answer to my questions. How many long minutes did I stand there, looking at him silently? I do not know. I did not speak. He said nothing. The birds in the garden were silent too. But all the time, his eyes never left me. And then, suddenly, before I knew it, the tower was empty.